you're talking about trends, and like let's talk about single malt because that's a trend that's happening in Canada. You think that just the barley grain is just releasing good flavor that's different than a typical mash bill? What is it about single malt that it's growing popularity?
The fact that Jack Daniels did it.
Hey, welcome to Super Social Club. I'm Jeremy.
This is Whisky in the Six. I'm Rob.
Welcome to the Whisky Rant Podcast.
It's a little crusty.
It's frustrating.
And it's going to be a little bit of a rant.
I don't understand it. I don't know why.
Some sort of injustice.
Anyway, end rant.
Hello and welcome back to the Whisky Rant Podcast. I'm Jeremy.
Rob.
And tonight we are joined by an amazing guest, Jason from the Mash and Drum, the most trusted name in bourbon on YouTube.
100%.
Jason, thanks so much for joining us. How are you tonight?
The most trusted name on YouTube.
In my opinion, 100%.
I appreciate that, guys. Nice to be on. I've been listening to your podcasts and your episodes, and yeah, I'm honored to be a guest. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's been a while, right? Like, I mean, you were on a live, we randomly went live one night or something, and you joined us one night.
Yeah.
But other than that, like scheduled together, it's been a while. And one of the occurrences were here at the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's right.
That was the old Game of Thrones. We got to bring it back next time House of Dragons comes back for the season finale.
Yeah, I'll have to take another trip to Canada and join you guys for that because there's a lot to be said about House of Dragon as well. So
yeah, we'll do that for sure.
So lots of topics on the cue sheet tonight. Craft distilleries was something that we were thinking about talking about.
Yeah.
The pros and cons of craft distilleries. There's so many popping up. You look at the US right now, over 2,500 craft distilleries. Canada, well over 150.
Oh, yeah.
They're popping up all over the place. It's been a huge trend the last 5 to 10 years. It's
Mhm.
just flooding the market with craft distilleries. Jason, what are some pros and cons of the craft distilleries right now that you're noticing in your neck of the woods in the US?
I'll start off with cons first. I think the con part of it is in, and however you guys want to look at it. I look at it as we're in a golden age of whiskey right now. There's so much whiskey to drink, so much whiskey to try. No matter, there's something for every palate that's sitting on the shelf. And I don't think anyone can really argue that. There's just so much, whether good, bad, ugly, no matter what it is, there's something to try for everyone.
Absolutely.
So I think even though that's good, it's also part of the con because I think it's harder especially if it's a small distillery starting just in the last few years, or even starting now, I feel like you got to work, 30 times as hard just to make yourself stick out. Like what's different about you than these other guys have been coming out with in the last 5, 6, 7 years. Because I feel like all that stuff that we saw, all these startups that started, 8, 9, 10 years ago, all this whiskey that they've been filling and barreling is starting to come of age. Yeah. And we're starting to really see the full potential of what some of this craft whiskey could be, and what it could turn into. So I think as part of a con for it, I think it's just an oversaturation of the market. It's hard to look at where you want to go. So I think people just tend to stay in their lane. Like, I don't know what the hell that is. I don't know what the hell that is.
Yeah.
I've never seen that bottle before. I don't know what label that is. So I'm just going to buy what I know. So it just gets that much harder to, and you got to talk price in there too, because a craft whiskey will come out and it'll usually be at least $50 to $80, if not more.
Right.
So why am I paying the money for a 4 to 5 year old product when I could get a 9, 10, 11 year old product for a lot cheaper from a bigger distillery?
I think that's like the biggest con when it comes to the craft distillery, right? Like Jeremy and I spoke about that a little bit off camera. Like, how is any new guy coming to the forefront now supposed to compete with the $70 to $80 range, like single malts and that sort of stuff that are from Scotland that are 10 to 12 years old already, when you're coming out with this 3-year-old product and you have to sell it at $70 because you're not going to make any profits because it took you 3 years to get there before you could sell anything. And then you have to pay for until you're at least 15 years into the game, it's a super expensive game to be in, right?
For sure it is. And you're also taking a huge gamble with your money. Because, these craft distilleries, they are coming in at a higher price point because obviously their operation costs are more than established brands.
Yeah.
And how do you choose? There is so much oversaturation in the market. Can you really risk your money on a product that is brand new that you know nothing about? I mean, it might be presented in a way you like at cask strength or barrel proof or whatever.
Yeah.
But still, do you know? It's so hard. That's the risk that you take as a consumer, taking a chance on all of these new distilleries, and how many are actually worth their money.
Yeah, I almost feel bad for some of these companies because how are you going to make a name for yourself if you don't sell your product? And how are you supposed to sell your product if it's coming in too expensive because you can't afford to put it in any less than, $90 a bottle? But guess what? When you're at $90 a bottle, you're competing with stuff that's twice your age, sometimes more, right? So it's a really tough game to be in, especially like Jason said, it's getting oversaturated. So, it's good in one way because as a consumer, what does oversaturation mean? It means that the prices are going to start to come down a little bit, right?
Yep.
But if you're a craft distiller, you're scared a little bit because you need to stand out, like Jason said. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, especially if your stuff is just coming of age now, and at that $50 to $60 price point, maybe 70. It's okay, now we can start making a profit. But it took you so long to get to that point, and now the market is what it is. It's tougher. Where I think the pros happen on the craft whiskey market, and we touched on this a little bit before we started, but you have craft distillers that have influenced the old heritage distillers in the last several years.
Yeah.
So stuff that the craft distillers have done, whether it be finish wise, whether it be experimental, using different types of wood types, wood casks, wood species, different mash bills, all that stuff that a craft distillery could do at the drop of a dime, that takes years for a big distiller to do. I think is where the craft, it's the same as when you just look at a small business versus a huge corporation. Privately owned businesses can make a switch on a dime because they don't have to go through all the red tape. Right. So craft distilleries could do the same thing. They could experiment a little easier. They could bring in different barrels, see how their distillate reacts with it, do different things, and then turn that into a trend, which then it seems as such the big distillers seem to follow suit eventually, maybe not right away, because I think they got to do a lot more things to make that happen than the small distillers do. So I think while with their own stuff, the craft distillers, it could be definitely difficult to stand out. But if they hit on something that becomes a trend, then you got something.
Yeah.
Yeah, who are leading the way in the craft distillers right now? Are you looking at Texas and success that Iron Root has and Balcones has, and they've done really, really well as craft distillers? We have two bottles in front of us right now, Two Brewers and Shelter Point, arguably the two best craft distilleries in Canada right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's much of an argument at the moment. They're probably the best.
Yeah.
And they might be the best distilleries, period. Right?
Sure.
Shelter Point's on their way from breaking out of even just, I don't even know if you can consider them a craft distillery anymore because they have thousands of barrels lined up in their, and their product is all coming of age at around 10, 11, 12 years old now. So I think they just broke out of that. It's, maybe you could still kind of call them a craft. Maybe you can call them that for the first 20 years of their existence, but they're breaking out of that. These guys are getting older too. The only problem with Two Brewers is they don't probably produce enough to not be considered a craft distiller.
Yeah. So Jason, what are we looking at in the US? Who is leading the way in craft distilling right now?
Well, I think when you look at craft distillers, first you have to define it a little bit. I don't really look at craft distillers. I think everyone's a craft distiller, especially if you're just making it from grain to glass. But when you're talking about some of these newer distilleries in the market, the ones that have really kind of made noise the last several, couple of years, one of them I point to is Starlight always, which is out of Indiana. It's kind of like the other big distillery in Indiana that everyone kind of points to, other than Ross and Squibb, MGP, or whatever you want to call them. Those guys are, just absolutely killing it with their quality. Their distillate has gotten better and better and better over the last several years. They're doing a bevy of different types of finishes, both in their bourbon, both in their ryes. They're doing blends. I mean, everything from blueberry port to amburana to port to estate port to sherry to double oaked. I mean, you think of it, they're doing it. I think some people looked at it a little bit negatively when they first started out, because it's like, you kind of look at, some folks that are like, okay, well, they're obviously doing all these finishes because their distillate isn't really up to age yet. So you're just trying to put a lipstick on a pig a little bit. But now that their stuff is coming of age and getting older, you're getting to that 4, 5, 6-year-old age range with those finishes. I think that some of the stuff that Starlight's doing is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you could call really Sagamore Spirit craft, because they're getting bigger and bigger, but what they're doing with rye whiskey is absolutely incredible.
How's that new PX? Not to interrupt your train of thought there, but how's the new PX finish, Sagamore? We just got it here at the LCBO. I'm wondering.
Oh, dude, that's an automatic pickup. It's amazing. It's really, really good. It ended up being my number 3 rye of the year, and I did like a 12 rye blind tasting, and it made it all the way up to 3rd, and it was pretty impressive. Nice. I think New Riff from a standpoint has really come of age. Some of like the new stuff that's kind of been hitting. What's that bottle that I had here? Old Dominic's out of Memphis, Tennessee. Their stuff is really starting to hit. Hard Truth out of Indiana as well, really starting to hit, really starting to kind of find their stride, mostly on the rye front. And I think a lot of these new distillers are really trying to make headway with their rye whiskeys, because you can release it at a little bit of a younger age, before the bourbon comes of age. So if you get a good rye, get some good distillate out there, I think you have a chance to do something different.
Yeah, there's a local distillery actually not far from my house. It's called Last Straw. They recently won some decent awards for their rye. Their newest cast strength rye. It's fantastic. I've had a chance to try it myself. They are also doing it's a single malt technically, but it's made from chocolate stout barley, like a chocolate stout, like a barley stout. And it's also won a lot of awards as well.
Kind of like what Glenmorangie does with the Signet, like using that
So they use stout beer, and then they distill that into a whiskey. So it's
we've seen some of that too in American whiskey. I think the trend this year is going to be more beer finishes, more beer collaborations.
Really?
We've already seen it with Bardstown Bourbon Company doing 2 different stout finishes. They did a KBS, and they also did a Goose Island finish. And I think we're going to see more and more of these throughout this year. That was kind of a prediction I had. Driftless Glen out of Wisconsin is making absolutely amazing stuff. I can't get enough of doing picks for my own group with them. It's just the stuff they're making is absolutely insanely good. But then, even aside from the craft distillers, I think the biggest thing that's kind of hit the market are blenders. I think blenders even more so than craft distillers are the ones that are kind of the in-between bottles that you really don't know what to expect. Like a craft distiller, you could kind of taste that profile and be like, yes, I like this, or no, I don't like this, and kind of move on. Blenders, you talk about Penelope, you talk about Buzzard's Roost,
Barrel,
Found North, a million of these blenders coming out that you just not those I think are coming even more into the market than the craft distillers.
Is what so Barrel, they would be considered a blender, right? Barrel?
Absolutely. Yeah, Barrel Craft Spirits. For sure.
What about what is it? Foregate? Not Foregate. Is it Foregate?
Yeah, Foregate.
Are they a blender or are they a craft distillery?
No, they just purely source distillate. So they are sourcing high age distillate, throwing it in some different finishes. Now, what they do, that's a little bit of a niche, is they do combo barrel distilling, which they're not exactly doing 2 barrels, but they will take a barrel that was holding sherry most of its life, And then somebody decided to take that sherry barrel and age port wine in it.
Oh, wow.
And then once that barrel's done, then you have kind of those two different distillates that have been sitting in that barrel, aging. And then Foregate will take that barrel and throw like a 10-year and 11-year-old bourbon in it, and then see what both those flavors do collectively. So, yeah. So I think what they do is interesting. Foregate did do a blend. They have done blends. They did their first Burai last year, which ended up being my top bourbons of the year, which was freaking delicious. It was a bourbon and a rye blend finished in I want to say a dark rum and a port barrel. It was pretty damn delicious. So,
yeah, I got a couple of actually, to go back to the craft. I have a couple. Would you consider, when it's Scotch, it just doesn't feel like a craft distillery, does it? I don't know what it is, but the Ardmacurran, these guys are new too. King's Barn, they're a lowland single malt. There's a whole bunch of even in Scotland distilleries that are popping up.
Well, why don't we try to define what we think craft distilling is? Like, Jason, how would you define it? Is it someone like independently owned? Is it production volume that they put out? What makes a distillery craft?
I don't know. For me, like I said, I think all distilleries are somewhat craft distilleries. So back to Jeremy's point, I would probably go back to like volume. If you're only churning out, a couple hundred barrels like a year because you're so small, then maybe that is where craft goes under, because you're just not putting out a lot of stuff.
Right.
You're just kind of more experimenting. You're trying to get your bearings on exactly what you want to produce. Stuff that's a young age, stuff like that. I mean, I'm curious, like Scotch, like I feel like you could get away with a young peated cask. You could, Wee Beastie, 5 years, just to use Ardbeg as an example. 5 years old, hard peat. You could kind of mask a little bit of that young distillate in there. Absolutely. Maybe some people it doesn't mask it very well.
Right.
But if you're not doing a peated cask, if you're just doing like a sherry cask, does it really work at like 5-6 years old? I mean, you tell me.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, one example of like a craft Scottish distillery would be Daft Mill, and they are definitely craft. Like, it's one farmer, his yield, and he didn't produce anything, didn't release a bottle until it was 12 years old.
Yeah, Daft Mill's super unique because they immediately became like ridiculously popular. It was like the guy, the prom king started a distillery and immediately sold out barrels. Like, it didn't even like matter what I don't know.
The whole story behind it is what really sold.
I get it.
Like, he's like, I'm only making this much. He's almost like, I'm making it for my friends, but I'll sell you a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, I'm only doing 2 distillates of the year, 1 summer batch, 1 winter batch. That's it. And people just, I mean, it was really good quality stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it's almost like you can't get it, so you want it.
Yeah. And I guess, 100% in that sense, it is a craft. So it should be on this table right here. And I do have it, right?
So like, that's an example of like a Scotch that is craft, but like, it's not, he didn't pump it out super young, right? Because he didn't really do it he was more like this a passion product more than it is like a investment moneymaker.
Yeah. I wonder if he was already fairly well off, and that's why he was able to do it that way. Like, he waited 12 years before he put out his first bottle. That's absurd. Mm-hmm. Who does that? I don't think anybody does that. I don't think anybody in the game has ever done that.
Not like nowadays. It doesn't seem so.
I don't think.
Well, I mean, especially in bourbon, like, you kind of want them to wait 5-6 years, but you don't normally get that. You see a lot of stuff at 4 years old, unfortunately. Yeah. But some stuff can be really good at 4 years. You just never know. I mean, there's really shit distillate out there at 4 years, and then sometimes you run across, like, for example, a craft distillery that I just did. We did 2 picks of with our group called Cedar Ridge. They're in the middle of God knows where, Ohio, and their I'm sorry, not Ohio, Iowa, and their distillate is probably some of the best younger tasting distillate I've ever had. Like, you would never think it's 4 years old just tasting it. There's no youthful bitterness to it. I think Starlight is getting to that point. I think they've kind of figured it out. So it's just, it is what it is. As it progresses, and as these small distilleries start to figure it out.
Yeah, I pass over that Woody's, because this is Colorado distillery that I'm not very familiar with, but
I've never seen that label in my life.
yeah, heard great things about it. It's 6 years old.
That looks dark for 6 years old. Is that cast strength?
It is. It's 59.5%.
Okay.
The mash bill is 70% corn, 15% rye, 15% barley, and it's all new American oak. It's a bourbon, right? Looks pretty cool. I'm gonna actually crack it and try it.
Crack it open. We've had some good stuff from some Colorado distilleries.
Colorado is like the sneaky next coming of Kentucky, I feel like, because they have a handful of distilleries that are doing some pretty good stuff. Like we mentioned 291 before we went live, but there's also Stranahan's that's been there for a long time.
I feel like they have good water.
Yeah.
Right?
They have two things. They have good water, and they have a good fluctuation of weather in Colorado.
Yeah.
No matter where you are. And if you have those two things, if you know how to make good whiskey, you could probably churn out some really good whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you had anything from was it Traverse City Whiskey Company? They made like a big name for themselves.
Yeah, Traverse City up in Detroit. They have been doing some their barrel proof rye. I think their ryes have been really delicious. Their bourbons at a high proof have been really good. Again, you get into a price point issue with them. Yeah. If you like their distillate, you like their distillate. Another one I would throw in from Michigan is Mayor Pingree, making absolutely fantastic blends and bourbon blends and single barrels. All their stuff is coming of age. I mean, there's just a lot of good whiskey being made, especially in the Midwest, and as you work your way to the West.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's that other Colorado distillery that we really like? It's right over there. It's at this actual bottling is fantastic. Boulder.
Oh yeah, Boulder.
Yep. This is the Trailhead, and it's a single malt, 52.5%. This is fantastic. This was aged in a sherry barrel. Canada got the whole barrel. This is really good.
Yeah, the same folks I was just telling you guys about, Cedar Ridge in Iowa. Yeah, they make a single malt called the Quintessential, and they just did their first all sherry matured single barrel that they just released at cast strength, and it's phenomenal. It's one of the best American single malts I've had. So, which I think is going to be the next trend.
Yeah,
because I don't know. Yeah,
you were talking about trends, and let's talk about single malt, because that's a trend that's happening in Canada. You think that just the barley grain is just releasing good flavor that's different than a typical mash bill? What is it about single malt that it's growing popularity?
The fact that Jack Daniels did it. I think that's what's making it popular, to be honest. I mean, you had guys, you had Virginia Distilling Company. You guys mentioned Stranahan's, Balcones. I mean, we've seen American single malts being crafted here for the last several years. Some people have definitely paid attention to it, but I think we're going to start seeing these bigger, again, this is where to my point earlier, you have smaller distillers making American single malts that are now going to be guiding the bigger distilleries. And I think with all the whiskey out there, the bourbons, the ryes, the oversaturation of the market, you're always looking for something different. So what's the next big thing for these grandfather distillers to do? Do an American single malt. Yeah. Jack Daniels figured it out. They're owned by Brown-Forman, who also owns Glendronach. I think they had a lot of guidance there, which was definitely told to me, from Jack Daniels, which I thought was really interesting. Yep. So once they kind of learned how to do it and distill it and work with barley, they made their own. And I think that's what we're going to see now from the, I think the more and more these bigger distillers get into it and start trying to craft their own, I think the bigger it's going to get. I think it just took a little bit to get there because nobody with a big name was really diving into it. And I think now that Jack Daniels has, we'll see more popularity of the American single malt category, especially if you factor in it just got an official designation from the from the TB, what do you call it? The TTB in the United States. So there's guidelines now to how you have to make American single malt.
Okay.
And I think that'll just make it more competitive in the market. And I think it was perfect timing from Jack Daniels' standpoint to get in on the game right then and there, because I think this is going to drive innovation from everybody else to come out with an American single malt, especially when you have, bourbon's bourbon, but to have that word American on the front, I think that's a big deal. So
yeah, American single malt, is that going to be like 100% barley or like malted barley or?
Yeah, it's got to be barley, but the barley has to be grown in the U.S. I think that's one of the guidelines.
Cool.
But they did keep it, I think, to a point where you could still be pretty creative. They wanted to kind of keep it, the rules and regulations a little bit looser than bourbon, so you can have some flexibility as far as aging, and using a used cask, a new cask, whatever it may be.
Right.
So
it's an interesting time, especially for a single malt, and I feel like this is where Scotland has to be careful.
Yes, they
right?
definitely do.
They have to be careful because as much as it's a culture there and as much as they do an incredible job, like, let's be honest, we drink majority Scotch for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be careful in the sense that the US could sneak up on them. Canada can sneak up on them and put out some distilleries that are coastal, that have great climates, that can age whiskey a little faster than what Scotland can, So it's a scary. If I were a Scottish distillery, I'd start to really think about how I'm going to win over fans in the next little while. And I think Ben Romick is very proactive about this. I think Springbank already knows they're going to be a player in the game for a very, very long time.
mm-hmm.
I think companies like Macallan, Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, they need to be very careful.
Yeah, they're using their brand recognition that they've built up the last however many years, and they have dipped quality in their bottlings and jack prices.
Yeah.
And that can only last for so long.
It's only a matter of time until someone comes out with a product that's cheaper, that kind of tastes like Macallan or kind of tastes like one of those big brand names, and can sell boatloads of stuff to China and boatloads of stuff to the other Asian markets and basically make those other guys obsolete.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time. So
I'll tell you what, Virginia Distilling here in the United States, they have a, I forgot the age statement on it, but they have a port finished American single malt that you could put right up against, and it's a little bit higher of a proof. You could put it right up against the Glenmorangie Quinta Reuben 14-year, which is one of those like quintessential single malts that you kind of reach for. Non-chill filtered 46% for the Quinta Reuben. And it's a really great malt for the price.
Yeah.
But you have like companies like Virginia Distilling coming out that could go right head to head with it and be at that same price point. What's going to stop somebody from saying, well, this is from America, I'm going to buy it?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Oh, yeah. You're going to get, that's one thing people know. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. The one thing people know is Americans are very patriotic. So they have a choice of equal quality things. And one's coming from the US and one's coming from somewhere else. What are they going to choose? They're going to choose that American product.
For sure.
Right. And you're probably going to find a lot of Canadian people that do the same, probably because the price is going to be better.
Yeah.
And, so like I said, the clock is ticking on these big distilleries to change the game, fix their product, or lose out to the 2,000 distilleries that opened up in the last 5 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
I think you have two different sides to the coin too. I think you have folks coming into the game, they're going to try to offer something at a budget type level to set themselves apart, try to find something or create something that's a great taste, a great flavor, that's a little bit more of an approachable price point.
Right. Yeah.
Now, what that price point is, 40, 50, 60 bucks, whatever it may be. Then you have the completely different flip side of it, where single malt distilleries want to make things more exclusive, more rare, more exclusive casking, higher ages. That's how they're going to set themselves apart. But unfortunately, with that end of it, they're only looking at like maybe the top like 5-10% of whiskey drinkers. They're going to pay the money to access that.
Yeah.
So
what happens when a Texas company uses the Texas barbecue approach to smoking their barley and does an Octomore style whiskey
Right.
that's 4 years old or 3 years old? You don't need much in Texas.
Yeah.
Like I don't even 3 years old. You're risking losing half the cask or probably.
It's true.
Right? So what happens then? Like you have a virgin oak cask or like, you know, a char level 1, because anything more than that probably will like get sucked up. Smoked barley, and then you distill it in you know, and you age it in Texas, or you want to be like, let's say California does it, or someone else, you know what I mean? Like you use that Louisiana barbecue style way, like that's how Bruichladdich smokes their barley. It's like how they would smoke fish.
Right.
That's how they get all that ppm into their barley, is that slow smoking, as a like low temperature, as opposed to the hot like couple hour out of smoking their peat, right? So
they smoke their peat like brisket, low and slow, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right? And that's what causes the ppm to go in the like hundreds to, you know. So now what happens when the US starts doing that?
I mean, my guess is that Scotland's going to really play on the fact that, because look, I mean, you have US single malt, you know, producers. I still feel like it's not made like it is in Scotland, though. And there's a quality and a romanticism about a single malt Scotch being made in Scotland.
Oh, for sure.
The barley that's being grown there, if they're utilizing that barley, and all coming from Scotland, the stills that are just historic, and all of them are different. They're like you know, they're like snowflakes. They're all a little different.
Yeah.
You know, and each and every distillery has their own type of, or a different take on their still that makes their distillate so unique. And I think that's what they have to play on. Because I still think, you know, even if American single malt gets to a point where it's that good, it's super high quality. And I could tell you just from being, you know, drinking bourbon and being with bourbon people, I don't think the casual bourbon drinker is ready for American single malt yet. Single malt to them, I still think is a kind of it's not sweet enough.
Yeah.
Because another thing that I've been seeing in the last couple of years is the desertification of bourbon.
Yeah.
Everything is getting sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And malted barley does not fall into that sweetness unless you're throwing it in a super wet port or sherry cask to make it that sweet.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a great point.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's going to kind of keep Scotland on top when it comes to single malt.
Yeah.
I mean, also the way they mature whiskey, right? Like you said, is low and slow. It's low temperature and for a long amount of time. And that process of maturation just adds the elegance and the refinement to the whiskey.
Oh yeah, they have a couple 100 years head start, right? Like there's no joke in the reserves that are in Scotland. But you got guys like Shelter Point, like I said, they have a couple thousand barrels now stashed, right?
Yeah.
In a location in the world that in a lot of ways mimics the climate of Scotland.
Yep.
Maybe a touch warmer, right? So it's a touch warmer, mimicking that like salty, like sea spray air. You know, they're getting glacier water.
Right.
So Shelter Point can be very dangerous. I think Two Brewers has to stay a little smaller because they have to age everything in-house because Yukon is cold.
Yeah.
Right. So you start to like have a unair conditioned like aging house, and all of a sudden you're not really aging your whiskey anymore for a good portion of the year because it's too cold to do it. So that's where I think Shelter Point really has an advantage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had tried some Shelter Point when I came to your place, and even at that time, I was really impressed with it. So I can only imagine how their stuff is aging up now.
Jason, I want to go back to something you mentioned before. One of your predictions is distilleries using beer barrels to mature whiskey. We've had some experience in the Scotch world. The
Glenfiddich IPA.
The Glenfiddich IPA. I wasn't big on it.
No, it's super sweet though. Surprisingly, it wasn't really IPA-ish.
There was the Lagavulin, the Offerman.
The Offerman,
was done in
stout. Was it a Guinness?
It was in a Guinness barrel.
Yeah.
What is it about beer barrels? Is it the availability that attracts distillers to age that? Is it the flavor profile? What do you think? What do you think it is?
I think it's just kind of the next thing that people are looking for. I think that if you've, we were talking a little bit about like picks and different things that have been available here in the United States. There's, a ton of sherry, a ton of port finishes, Amburana. I don't know if you guys have ever had a chance to try any Amburana finished whiskeys.
No.
Amburana is a Brazilian type of wood species that is being used in every facet of. I think the first one to really make it interesting was Starlight, as I mentioned. It basically just tastes like. Have you ever been to Taco Bell late at night and you got the cinnamon twists? That's what Amburana tastes like. It's like it is just cinnamon, sugar, cinnamon roll. It is just, a little bit of maple to it. It just makes it very sweet and it's so distinctive. So you have Amburanas, you have rums, you have sherry, you have port. You have a combo of those. So I feel like everyone's kind of looking for the next thing. And I think people have toyed with some beer finishes. But I think late last year we saw Goose Island being used as a beer finish, like some really like deep, rich, chocolatey stouts, porters, IPAs. So I think we're going to see more of the producers get into different beer finishes, because I just think everything I feel like has been used. So it's always looking for the next thing, and I don't feel like enough distillers have done anything with beer. So I feel like that could be the next thing.
Yeah. Well, these guys, two brewers right here, as you're saying it, I'm getting all kinds of beer notes in their actual whiskey, because they actually they were originally beer makers, and they take a beer maker approach to making their single malt. So have you tried the two brewers yet or no?
No, but the one I'm talking about here is this bottle right here. This is the Bardstown Bourbon Company. This is the Goose Island one.
Okay,
nice.
And this bottle's no slouch. So the one caveat to this bottle, unfortunately, was that it was only available in Illinois, because that's where Goose Island is based. This is a 12-year-old Kentucky bourbon, 12 years old, that they threw in a Goose Island stout cask. I shit you not. It's like drinking chocolate fudge straight out of a glass.
Yeah, that's
it's
awesome. Ridiculous.
You can't not like that unless you don't like chocolate and you're, not a human being. So it's insanely deliciously good. 111.4 proof. If more stuff like this comes out, I think it's just gonna keep taking off. Yeah. So
that's a company that like keeps eluding us. Like we really want to try Bardstown, but like, have you tried it yet?
No,
I don't think I've tried it either.
So I'll get some samples for you guys, because I think you guys need to try the Origin series, which is their. So they were sourcing from, they were kind of putting their. So when they started, they had the Fusion series. That was Bardstown Bourbon Company using their young distillate and blending with some sourced older distillate from Kentucky, to kind of blend the young and the old together, which was hence, Fusion. Then they had their Discovery series, is where they're just blending a bunch of different older whiskeys that source all different together. They started putting some Canadian corn whiskey in it last year in some of the blends, which was interesting. So like 12, 13, 14 year, Canadian whiskey, putting corn whiskey being put into those blends. But now they had just released the Origin series. So they were releasing all these as their own distillate was being aged up. And now their stuff has hit about 4, 5, 6 years old, is ready to release. They have a high rye bourbon that they released that I forgot the proof point of it. Then they have a bottled and bond wheated bourbon, which I shit you guys not. This could go right up against Weller, right in the face. And I think that's what's great about it. And then they have a rye that's using some I think it's a cherry wood, an infrared cherry wood charred stave to kind of, help flavor a little bit, but a rye whiskey. All three of these all coming out for about 65 bucks. And I think the price is only going to go down as more of this stuff hits the market in the future. But Bardstown Bourbon Company is a huge player in the market in Kentucky, and a company that I think sky's the limit for them.
Yeah, we've been deprived of good bourbon. We've talked about it before. The availability in this province is nothing. Anything that's remotely okay goes to lottery, which is impossible to win. Even the stuff like that comes in through Alberta, it's not that good. It's not like it's not stuff that you would reach for. I mean, we watched.
I don't like this actually. Like the palate, like it does not drink 60%. It actually tasted a lot better than I thought it would.
We watched your whiskey of the year, bourbon of the year, and they all sounded so delicious. We haven't tried any of them.
Yeah, I just sourced the Calumet 16. So
the Calumet 16. Now, I will warn you, there are different batches. So the one that you have that you taste might be different than the one that I got.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean,
you guys don't get Elijah Craig barrel proof out there?
Yeah, again, that goes to like a lottery system, right? I mean,
Elijah Craig barrel proof goes to a lottery?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it sits on shelves for you guys. It does not do that here.
Because what happened was like 4 years ago, we used to get Stag Junior, and the LCBO would have such a headache because some stores would release it, just put it on the shelf, and one person would come in and buy all 38 bottles.
Yeah.
One store would be like, this is a one per customer thing, and sell it one per customer. And there was no cohesion between all the stores of what to do with it. It was kind of up to store by store basis. So the LCBO was like, forget all of this. We're putting that all online. It's either one per customer on an online sale, or it goes into a lottery program where you have to win a chance to purchase it.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of one per customer online, and I think that's got to be the way to go.
It's the most fair way because people will just come in and jack it, right? Like they'll just buy it all, and it's not fair. And it only really comes like that. Only really comes to like our area of Toronto. Like outside of Toronto, the entire other province won't get any of it. They won't see a single bottle. So it is the more fair way to do it.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy to me, especially for those big distilleries. It's just like, you feel like you guys would get enough volume up there that you wouldn't have to go lottery? That's crazy.
You would think so, but that's not the way it works. Even like something like something super basic like Eagle Rare 10-year-old, like that is like on online one per customer now too.
Oh please, that's even one per customer here in most places. Okay. You can't find that thing anywhere anymore. Anything Buffalo Trace, most of the Buffalo Trace products now, depends on the state, but most of the products, depending where you go, I mean, they're ghosts. You don't ever find them anywhere.
It's Springbank up here, pretty much. I mean, even Buffalo Trace up here is pretty hard to get, but at least the regular Buffalo Trace you can get.
You can get regular Buffalo Trace on the shelf, no problem. No problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. I mean, that's you're looking at an 8 to 9 year old bourbon, 90 proof. It's not bad for the money. I mean, always, but I think pricing is probably the most frustrated thing in bourbon these days, because price points are all over the place. And it's not just across the market. It's even from distillery to distillery. Like Rob, like you were looking for a Knob Creek 18, right?
Yeah.
So just looking at Jim Beam's price points, they just befuddle me every time I talk about it, because they will release a Knob Creek 18 for $160. That's an 18-year-old Kentucky bourbon at 100 proof for $160. That's less than the $10, a year of aging, which is pretty impressive when you think about it.
Yeah,
especially in today's market, because they could charge $300 for that, but they keep it $160. What they do decide to jack up in prices is like the releases like Little Book. Yeah. Little Book has like fucking 2-year-old, 3-year-old whiskey in it, and they want you to pay $140, $150 for it. Hardin's Creek, they released a 2-year-old bourbon but because it was put in a barrel at a different entry proof, with all this historic mumbo jumbo behind it, they charged $80 for it. So $80 to $90 for a 2-year-old whiskey, but then you're charging only $160 for an 18-year-old Knob Creek. The pricing is all over the map.
You should see it here. You should see Knob Creek here.
Knob Creek 12 here is now $150. So
what
the 9-year-old is what? Is $60.
$60. No, the 120 is $60.
The 120 proof 9-year-old,
which is a great deal. The 120 proof is $60.
Yeah.
Then for 3 years more, less ABV, you're getting almost more than double. It's $150.
It's $90 more.
It's almost $100 more.
But is that Jim Beam or is that LCBO price?
That's the LCBO spinning a wheel and being like, this one.
The LCBO is like,
what are we landing on? What are we?
9-year-old is $60. Let's spin the wheel. Let's see what the 12 will be. No. It's a joke. This province is a complete joke with whiskey. It's because the government owns the liquor stores. They have the monopoly. They can do whatever the hell they want. It's horrible for the consumer. And all we ask for, like, okay, it's taxed a lot, sure, okay, there's that tax, whatever, but like we don't get variety. No. Like they have the ability to bring in so much stuff. They have the ability to do like single barrel picks that they could do.
They could go to every distillery and
say so much more to just please the customer, and they don't do it. They
could literally go to every single distillery and say, listen, we're doing a barrel pick program every year. We're taking 2 of your barrels. We will pay whatever you want, and we'll fucking do it.
Yeah.
And the thing is the companies would be like, sure, no problem. Look at KWM, for example. They brought in KWM out of Alberta, brought in a 1992 family cask, first fill sherry, beautiful 30-year-old Glenfarclas. Mm-hmm. They charged $600 a bottle, which that bottle, like if it was a regular retail release, would be $1,200, no problem.
Right.
So you're getting it at a discount. Obviously, if the company can charge that little for it, literally half the price,
right?
The LCBO is going to be getting it at a discount. So they're essentially going to be getting like 12-year-olds for less than they get the actual like Glendronach 12-year-old on the shelf. So it just makes like perfect sense, but they have literally a bunch of buffoons running the show and have no idea what
Well, they don't care because they don't need to. Jason, you mentioned that you were doing some barrel picks. Why don't you tell us what that's about?
Yeah, so I teamed up a couple of years ago with my good buddy Scott from my bourbon journey. I always said that if I ever got a chance to do some barrel picks, let's do them together. We have similar palates. He's kind of like a straight middle of the road type palate. I like that, but I like to venture off and look for stuff that's a little bit different. So I think together we kind of keep ourselves in check. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so for my Patreon community, we started the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club, and we have done over 75 picks in 2 years.
Wow.
So we have done quite a few. Everything from the heritage distilleries to small distilleries. We've done single malts. We releasing our first cask strength Japanese whiskey this year, coming out pretty soon. So we're doing a lot. We're trying to give our club as much variety as we can. We have seen a little bit of a downturn in the buying lately because I just think there's so many single barrels out there right now. So we're trying to focus on stuff we know that people are going to want. And yeah, we'll see. It just continuously grows. We're definitely making a name for the quality of our picks. So we're really happy about it.
Yeah, it works. That's a huge amount, and it works a little differently in Canada, in the fact that we don't really do it at all.
No,
it works a little differently when we don't do any.
We've done a couple. I've done a couple.
Rob's done one with with Shelter Point, but it's not the way it kind of works in the US, right? You don't just like go to a distillery and they pull some barrels for you, and there's a whole experience, you whole try. That's not really how it works here.
No,
I mean, even like stores that bring in Scotch single barrels, they're more of just like, they get sent some samples, they pick one, and that's their store pick.
That's I guess the biggest challenge the LCBO has is that even when they're like offered store picks, they're not flying guys out to Scotland. They're just getting samples and then
Yeah, I remember like the Jack Daniels single barrel proofs that the LCBO got or the SAQ got. They were not even as good as the stuff you get off the shelf. Like,
no,
they just sold like the provinces here just garbage.
Yeah,
they're like, here, just take our leftover stuff that no one else wants, and they're like, oh great, we'll take it. We'll put a price tag.
I mean, it's interesting.
$180.
I've been so I live in Ohio. Ohio is a state controlled liquor agency, so we don't get there's pros and cons to that. You get the pros is that you have some sort of price control. Yeah. So, we're called the land of Weller because you could come to Ohio and find Weller Antique for like $50 here. Whereas if you go elsewhere, you'll probably find it jacked up for like $200, $250. So you get price control here, but at the same time, you don't get anything like if I were like when I lived in New York, I had a relationship that I built with a liquor store, and then anything allocated that came in, they would put aside for me because they knew I was going to either review it, drink it, share it, and not flip it. So I would get sold that bottle. I can't do that in Ohio because it's liquor. It's a state liquor agency. So anything that's allocated like BTAC or Pappy or even some of the old Fitzgerald high-aged releases that they do, any special Weller release, it's all by lottery. Yeah. And if it's not by lottery, it's dropped like randomly throughout stores all over the state where you have to, get in line at fucking 2 a.m. to try to get a bottle by 10 a.m. that morning. So there's pros and cons to it, but what we like to do with the picks though is just it's like a matter of just getting as much as we can out to to different types of drinkers. But I mean, I get it. You kind of have to play the game a little bit, unfortunately, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I got a quick story here.
Go ahead.
So Highland Park approached the LCBO. This was while I still had a good relationship with Highland Park. They approached the LCBO and they wanted the LCBO to do a barrel pick. So they invited me to this barrel pick. And there was like executives from the LCBO and myself at this pick. And they gave us three options.
Only three casks?
Only 3 casks to choose from that were already bottled, by the way. That were already bottled. And then we got to choose like what went on the label, basically. So there was a clear winner.
Okay.
And the executives from the LCBO wanted to pick the worst of the 3 because it was from a hogshead barrel, and one of the nicknames of Toronto is Hogtown. So they thought it would be cool to name the bottle Hogtown and totally disregard that it was the worst of the 3 picks. I'm like, So I'm looking at the ambassador while they're talking, and I'm like, these guys can't be serious. And I'm like, guys, I think it's the right move to go with the best of the 3.
Yeah.
And then they actually did, thank God. But it was
you have to
terrifying.
talk some sense in these marketing fucking idiots who only care about what they can freaking
And
sell.
these guys are making
what they can sell.
$300,000 a year.
The problem is that the LCBO is going to sell out of that bottle anyway, right? It's like how many bottles? 300 or something?
Yeah.
Right? They're going to sell out of it anyway. So
that's a good point, because I totally forgot where I was going. I was talking about the Ohio thing. They invited me to go to Wild Turkey and pick 15 barrels for the entire state. So I got to go with them to Wild Turkey and go through the warehouse and help pick 15 barrels for the entire state of Ohio.
That's pretty cool.
And it's one of those things where I've never picked barrels like that. It's always, as you guys alluded to, it's always like a handful of barrels. You got to try to find the best one.
Yeah.
This was like you're running through the warehouse and you're just drinking barrels and you're trying to find barrels that suck rather than barrels that are good.
Yeah.
Because they're like even the mediocre ones, if they're solid, we're taking them because people are going to buy them regardless.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is something to be said for that, for sure.
Yeah, and even in that, like that kind of pressure situation, drinking 15, 20, 30 drams, like that's a lot on your palate. Like to trust your palate alone is nerve-wracking in that moment. Like even when I did the Shelter Point one, or that Highland Park one, it's a little nerve-wracking. It's like, I don't know how much of this I'm actually tasting. That's, like they offered us a dram before we walked in for the Highland Park thing, which was a complete mistake because like we're about to select a barrel, right? So it's just, I don't know. That's a really tough. I commend these guys that are master distillers and master blenders because they put their palate through the ringer.
But I think picking barrels is becoming we talked about oversaturation in the market just with brands. I think single barrels are becoming an oversaturation, at least here, stateside, just because every club, every group, every store, everyone does a pick now. There's picks everywhere. So there's a uniqueness to it. And I think the beauty of picks is that if you get to know someone that, you align your palate with, and you're always going to get probably a pretty decent pick no matter what it is. But there are so many picks and people doing different experiences of it. I mean, I could tell you guys some of the best picks I've had. Maker's Mark was an absolute, say what you want about their whiskey, but it's the most amazing experience I've ever had doing a pick. And you're not really picking there. You're blending the staves to make a different profile, because they do their stave mixes rather than, you're not doing a single barrel because they hand rotate their barrels constantly. So for consistency purposes, they use the term flavor vision all the time when you're there. It's like this barrel hits a flavor vision, then we move it down the rick, and then it spends another couple years there, then we rotate and then we move it down again. So it's always consistent. So a single barrel pick there is no fun, which is why you have to do the stave profiles to do it. But absolute first class experience there. Then you have guys where you walk into a room, everything's kind of laid out for you. You have your barrels, that's what you pick from, and that's it. Heaven Hill, we were lucky enough to do one of the first Elijah Craig barrel proof picks for our group a couple years ago. And I love Heaven Hill, but the pick experience was kind of crap. It's 3 barrels here. This is what you get. If you don't, the first 2 barrels we picked were shit. We're like, these are terrible. If this 3rd barrel isn't decent, do they roll out more? Do we walk away? Like, what happens?
That's kind of like, I think that's big brand style barrel picking, right? Like that's probably what that is.
And what you were saying before is like every group does a pick. It's like, are they going to be pressured just to pick something that's like, just mediocre? Probably they would.
That's the thing. I think there are a lot of mediocre picks out there. I always use New Riff as an example. New Riff makes absolutely great whiskeys, especially ryes, but I have had way more like bad youthful bourbon picks than good ones. And I think it's because there are some folks in some groups that are probably just excited to go in there and do a pick, and they're just grabbing a barrel when they can. Rather than actually, taking the time to pick the right one. Because they rather decorate the bottle with wax and glitter and all this other bullshit, rather than the whiskey tasting good.
Put a big sticker on it.
Big ass sticker on it.
They want their name on the bottle.
Their name on the bottle. They could, share it with their friends and their family. And hey, look, we did this pick. Even though the whiskey's shit, look at my pretty bottle. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. There's a lot. I think there are still companies distilleries that are still honing their skills as a pick experience. And I still think there are the bigger brands are kind of, I don't know, I feel like every time I go, I feel like they're over it. So I just fucking pick a barrel and get out of here.
Because they know if it's not you, it's the next guy coming in, right?
Absolutely. They know if we don't pick it, if we're picky, they're like, okay, well, we don't care, because the next group that comes in is going to find one of these amazing and they're going to take it.
That's right. Exactly.
Fair enough.
So there's a lot of that.
Jason, why don't you tell us what's coming up on your channel? What can we look forward to? What are you putting out soon?
So I have, let's see, I have some new brand alert videos that I'm going to be dropping soon. A couple of new bourbon brands that I want to that I'm going to be highlighting. Some great single barrel companies, stuff that Bardstown's doing. I did a video a couple of years ago about my perfect collection to start for $400. If you want to start a bourbon collection for $400, these are the bottles you should buy. So I'm going to do a 2023 version of that because I literally can't include anything Buffalo Trace on it again because you can't find the shit.
Right.
So I'm redoing that a little bit. I have I have a couple of big ideas, some really great videos. But those are kind of the big ones coming up in the next. I'm doing a video real soon, which should be entertaining. For why Jack Daniels is considered a bourbon. The debate ends now.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I literally go through each facet of the the legal definitions for each facet of making Tennessee whiskey versus bourbon, and then going down the line. And if you still, by the end of that video, if you still think that Tennessee whiskey can't be called a bourbon, then you're either not watching the video, you're not paying attention, or you're just stubborn.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
You're from Tennessee.
Yeah. Oh, you're from Tennessee. Exactly.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. This was great, and we'll do it again sometime soon, I hope.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Check out Jason Matchton Drum. Link in the description down below. If you've not subscribed yet, 100% do that. The most trusted voice in bourbon on YouTube, 100%.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. I'm gonna get a shirt that says that.
Yeah,
Then that's one.
Yeah. And I'll take a royalty for coining it. Thank you. All right, thanks so much, guys. Have a good one. Cheers.
Cheers.